Shaft sinkhole tragedy. Tragedy. It was May 28, 1973, and a group of 9 diving experts had planned a dive at Mount Gambier shaft sinkhole. This sinkhole had a unique feature: there was only a tiny opening leading to a cave with a lake 20 feet below. From this opening, a beam of light went down into the cave and onto the lake, which was extremely helpful for the divers' orientation. This beam was visible throughout most of the cave unless divers ventured too deep into one of the 2 side branches. Everyone initially agreed that they would stay within a 200-foot maximum depth range so they could remain in the main chamber and still see the guiding light. This was their only plan. On the second day, however, 4 divers pled to go to the western section of the cave, aiming for a depth of 250 feet, which would have been a new record. This was deeper than initially intended and posed a significant risk because, in 1973, divers were still using regular air cylinders rather than mixed gas tanks. For this reason, they had to be more cautious as they went downwards because nitrogen narcosis might have settled in. As they went down, the increasing pressure would have pushed the nitrogen into the bloodstream, producing a state of consciousness that is similar to when people are drunk. Keep in mind that these divers were not very experienced in cave diving. They were more accustomed to standard open water scuba diving. This added even more risk to their plan. They started going downwards into the western section of the cave, and one experienced diver noticed that nitrogen narcosis was kicking in, so he immediately went back out. Several of them followed him and went back to the surface as well, but 4 of them kept going, determined to set the record and get a quick look before resurfacing. After a minute or so, the group at the surface became concerned, realizing the 4 divers would soon exhaust their air supply. A few returned to the cave to find them, and they discovered a flashlight and a camera on the bottom, but no trace of the divers. There was a problem that we haven't yet mentioned: silt. The movements of the 4 divers stirred up the long-settled silt into a sand cloud that would take a lot of time to settle back. This reduced visibility to less than an arm's length, removing any hope for orientation for the underwater divers. Without being able to see anything, oxygen running dangerously low, and nitrogen narcosis kicking in, the 4 divers drowned. Jacob's Well tragedy. It's Mossdale Cave incident. It was June 24, 1967, and 10 cavers were about to enter Mossdale Cavern to help clear some of the deeper passages and map them out. The 2 leaders of the group had already explored this cave before, which reassured everyone else. This particular cavern was known for its tight spaces and the very few areas where a person could fully stand. After a few hours inside, 4 of the cavers realized how difficult the cave actually was and decided to return to the surface. They noticed a cloudy sky, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The remaining cavers continued their descent until they reached the far Marathon Passage, which measured only 18 in x 12 in, with a small stream of water flowing along the bottom. Everything seemed to be going well, and the group on the surface soon noticed that it had started raining, so they took cover. Initially, the rain did not seem concerning, but the cavers inside began to notice rising water levels. When the water became alarmingly high, they decided to end the day's work and head back, even though they were still 3 hours from the entrance. Meanwhile, the surface group spotted something terrifying. A lake of water had formed around the cave entrance. The cavers inside had no idea how much water was about to flood the cave. The surface group ran to get help, while the cavers frantically tried to reach higher chambers. However, the water continued to rise, pressing toward their faces. Rescuers and hundreds of volunteers worked tirelessly, pumping water out of the cave and pumping oxygen inside, hoping that the cavers had found a safe chamber. Unfortunately, every one of the cavers drowned. Shaft sinkhole. Boy Scout cave rescue. On December 27, 2003, a group of 8 boys and 2 counselors set out for Boy Scout Cave in Florida. Among them were 15-year-old Michael Shiro and 16-year-old Javik Henderson, both eager for adventure. The cave was known for its narrow crawlways and sharp turns, but it was considered safe due to its stable structure. Their counselors were unable to navigate the tight passages due to their size, which is why they decided to stay outside, leaving the boys to explore. The cave's air was cool, and the light from 9 flashlights flickered through the dark passages. The group crawled deeper into the cave, undeterred by the oppressive silence that surrounded them. After about an hour, they reached a particularly difficult section known as the hairpin curve. The narrow passage twisted at a sharp angle, barely wide enough for one person to crawl through. Michael, determined to lead, pressed forward, followed by Henderson. But as Henderson tried to maneuver around the sharp bend, he became stuck, unable to move forward or back. Panic set in as his breathing quickened. Realizing he was trapped, Michael crawled back to help. But as he wedged himself into the narrow space, the walls of the cave scraped against their skin, making it harder to move. The group, waiting in the wider section of the cave, grew anxious. For over an hour, the two struggled. Henderson's body twisted painfully in the tight passage, and sharp edges of the rock dug into his ribs and hips. Each attempt to move only seemed to make things worse. As time passed, the situation grew dire. Then disaster struck. Michael, exhausted and cold, collapsed. Henderson was left in the dark, unable to help his friend. His cries for help echoed in the cave, but the other boys, too afraid to approach, could only panic and watch helplessly. Outside, the counselors were still unaware of the crisis unfolding inside. It wasn't until the boys made their way back to the entrance, frantic and out of breath, that they finally explained what had happened. The counselors immediately extinguished the fire they had lit and called 911. Rescue teams arrived quickly, equipped with tools and experience. Inside the cave, the air was thick with fear. The boys, pale and trembling, huddled together, unable to comprehend the gravity of their situation. The rescuers, understanding the risks of hypothermia and oxygen depletion, moved swiftly to reach Michael and Henderson. When the rescue team reached the hairpin curve, the sight was grim. Henderson was still conscious, but his movements were sluggish and his skin clammy. Michael, however, lay slumped just ahead, unresponsive and cold to the touch. The rescuers worked methodically, chiseling away at the limestone first to widen the narrow passage. Each strike echoed through the cave, adding to the tension. It took over an hour to free Henderson. As he was pulled from the hairpin curve, he let out a sob of relief. Though his body remained stiff and trembling, the rescuers wrapped him in a thermal blanket and dragged him through the narrow passages toward the surface. With Henderson safe, attention turned to Michael, who was still in an unconscious state. After 2 hours of grueling work, they freed Michael. His pulse was weak, but it was there. They carefully secured him in a harness and began the painstaking process of carrying him to the surface. As they emerged into the daylight, emergency medical teams rushed to stabilize the boys. Michael, still unconscious, was quickly treated for hypothermia. It took him an entire day to regain consciousness, but miraculously,